The earth trembled beneath the weight of countless footsteps as shadows stretched long across the ancient valley. Among the dense ferns and towering conifers lurked a predator whose presence was felt before it was seen. This was Fucaraptor, a hunter swift as lightning and sharp as obsidian. Its golden eyes pierced through the foliage with unrelenting focus as silence settled upon the forest. Every creature held its breath, knowing that survival balanced on the edge of its claws. In this primeval land ruled by strength and cunning, Fucaraptor stood as a force destined to shape its own legacy. The prehistoric world was a land of wonder and terror, where every dawn brought both opportunity and danger. In the heart of what would one day be known as Japan, dense forests spread across rolling valleys, and towering mountains framed the horizon. Rivers carved through the land, glistening in the sunlight, and carrying life through the wilderness. It was in this realm of mystery that a predator arose whose name would echo across time. That predator was Fucaraptor. Unlike the massive giants that dominated the earth, Fucaraptor relied on speed, agility, and cunning to claim its place in a world overflowing with competition. Fucaraptor was not the largest predator of its era, yet size was not the measure of its power. It stood tall on powerful hind legs, its body sleek, and muscular, built for bursts of speed and deadly precision. With razor-sharp claws and teeth designed to pierce flesh, it could bring down prey larger than itself. Its movements were silent and calculated, and its hunting style depended on patience and sudden bursts of violence. In a land filled with larger predators, Fucaraptor thrived not because of brute strength, but because of intelligence and adaptability. The forest where Fucaraptor lived was alive with sound. The calls of smaller dinosaurs echoed through the canopy, while massive herbivores thundered through the undergrowth in search of food. Every movement, every sound, every scent told a story of survival. It was a land where no creature could relax for long. At the top of this restless world, creatures like Fucaraptor hunted with unyielding purpose. They were both feared and respected, shaping the delicate balance between predator and prey. Fucaraptor's life was more than the chase. It was a constant battle to prove dominance over territory and rivals. The pack mentality of some predators clashed with the solitary instincts of others, forcing encounters that ended in both victory and loss. For Fucaraptor's survival depended on more than strength alone. It required foresight, instinct, and an ability to read the rhythm of the forest. Each day it walked a thin line between hunter and hunted, for while it was powerful, there were always larger threats lurking in the shadows. Among these threats were towering dinosaurs like the fearsome tyrannosaurs, whose sheer size struck terror into awe. Yet even they had to watch their flanks, for the agility of a creature like Fucaraptor could exploit weakness where none seemed to exist. The struggle between giants and swift predators defined the story of the land. Each encounter reshaped the balance of life, and each predator carved its place into history through both blood and instinct. As time stretched on, Fucaraptor became a symbol of resilience. It was proof that survival was not reserved only for the largest or the strongest. Its presence in the fossil record tells us today that even in a world filled with immense creatures, agility and strategy carried weight. Every fossil bone unearthed whispers of its battles, its hunts, and its survival. Scientists study these fragments to piece together the life of a predator that knew no fear in its time. To step into the world of Fucaraptor is to step into a place where danger waits at every turn. It is to enter a realm where survival is written in the clash of claws and teeth. It is to understand that life in the prehistoric age was as much about intelligence as it was about strength. The story of Fucaraptor is the story of a hunter who proved that in a land of giants, even the swift and clever could reign supreme. This is not just the tale of a dinosaur. It is the unfolding of a saga about survival, instinct, and legacy. To know Fucaraptor is to witness the drama of the ancient earth, where every heartbeat carried the weight of destiny, and every step echoed across the endless wilderness. The forest stirred with an uneasy calm as dawn's first light broke through the canopy. Mist curled along the riverbanks, and the air smelled of damp soil and wildflowers. Yet beneath the beauty of the land, danger always lurked unseen. Fucaraptor's senses were sharp that morning, its yellow eyes scanning the shadows, while its nostrils flared at the faintest whiff of prey. Hunger gnawed deep inside its belly, urging it forward. It had been days since a successful hunt, and the predator knew that hesitation in such a world could mean death. It crouched low, its body rippling with quiet power. Ahead, a small herd of herbivores grazed near the water, their heads bent low as they tore ferns. They were iguanodons larger than Fucaraptor, but vulnerable if isolated. The predator moved with ghost-like silence, each step deliberate and measured. The hunt had begun. Yet, something was different this morning. The air carried a tension of vibration that even Fucaraptor could feel. Birds scattered from the trees in frantic waves, and the herd of iguanodons lifted their heads with nervous jerks. Their nostrils flared, their ears twitched, and panic spread through them. They bolted before Fucaraptor could strike their heavy feet, thundering into the forest as if chased by an unseen terror. The predator froze, its instincts screaming that something greater than hunger was at play. The ground trembled. At first it was faint, a subtle quake beneath the soil, but it grew stronger until even the stones rattled. Fucaraptor's claws dug into the earth as it steadied itself. The forest fell silent. Then out of the mist came a roar unlike anything it had ever heard. Deep, primal, and thunderous, it rolled through the valley and shook the trees. From the haze emerged a shape larger than anything Fucaraptor had seen before. A massive predator stepped into the clearing, its scales glistening in the weak light. It was a tyrannosaur young, but already a giant. Its head swayed from side to side, its teeth flashing in the sun, as it let out another bone-shaking roar. The iguanodons were not its only targets. Everything in the forest that morning became prey. Fucaraptor's eyes locked on the newcomer. Instinct told it to flee, but something else stirred inside. The tyrannosaur represented more than danger. It was a rival, an intruder threatening the delicate balance of territory. For Fucaraptor's survival depended on claiming land and food. If this creature established dominance, the predator's very existence would be at risk. The forest turned into chaos. Herbivores trampled through the undergrowth, desperate to escape, while smaller predators scattered in every direction. Fucaraptor moved swiftly, avoiding the stampede, its mind racing. The tyrannosaur was too powerful to confront head-on, but its presence was a challenge that could not be ignored. It was a spark of conflict that would shape the future of the valley. In the days that followed, the tension only grew. Fucaraptor shadowed the tyrannosaur from a distance, watching it claim kills and drive away all other predators. Food grew scarce, and the balance of forest began to tip. Hunger deepened into desperation. Rivals that once avoided each other were forced into closer contact, competing over the scraps left behind. For Fucaraptor, this was more than survival. It was destiny. The predator knew that a decision had to be made. To continue avoiding the giant would mean slow starvation. To challenge, it would mean risking everything. The forest was no longer the same safe hunting ground. It had become a battlefield where only one predator could stand supreme. The inciting moment was clear. The arrival of the tyrannosaur had disrupted the order of life in the valley. Fucaraptor's story would no longer be about ordinary hunts or silent prowls. It would now be about facing an unstoppable force, about testing the very limits of speed, cunning, and resilience. From that day forward, every step, every hunt, every choice would lead closer to the inevitable clash that awaited. The valley was alive with change. What had once been a realm where Fucaraptor thrived through cunning and speed had turned into a land scarred by fear. Every rustle in the forest, every distant roar, every tremor in the soil reminded the predator that a shadow now loomed over all. The tyrannosaur had come to stay. Fucaraptor moved cautiously through the undergrowth, its body sleek and coiled with tension. Hunger gnawed more fiercely each day. Where small herds of herbivores once grazed in peace, now panic reigned. They no longer lingered near waterholes or shaded clearings, but kept moving, driven by the tyrant's predatory raids. What food remained was fought over by desperate hunters. Even scavengers found themselves locked in skirmishes at every half-stripped carcass. Yet Fucaraptor was no ordinary predator. Its sharp mind was its greatest weapon, and in the rising chaos it learned to adapt. It tracked the tyrannosaur from afar, noting patterns in its movements. The giant favored certain paths, following herds along rivers and ridges. It struck with sheer power, crushing prey in a storm of teeth and weight. After each hunt, it lingered to feast, leaving nothing behind. But Fucaraptor began to notice weaknesses too. The tyrannosaur was young, strong, but reckless. Its size slowed it on uneven terrain, and its hunger drove it to hunt, often leaving trails of destruction behind. One evening, as the sun burned low, Fucaraptor stalked a group of smaller dinosaurs near the marshlands. A pair of hypsilophodons grazed at the edge of the reeds, their heads darting nervously as insects buzzed around them. Fucaraptor's muscles bunched as it prepared to strike. Then the ground shook again. The Tyrannosaur crashed through the trees like a living storm scattering the herd. Fucaraptor froze its chance at a meal lost once more. It crept back into the shadows, fury boiling in its chest. Each failed hunt pushed it closer to desperation. The Tyrannosaur was not merely a rival now. It was a thief of glutton, consuming the very lifeblood of the valley. Fucaraptor's sharp mind pieced together a single truth. To survive, it could no longer skirt the edges of this new power. It would have to outthink it. The first test came in the form of scavenging. Fucaraptor learned to trail the Tyrannosaur closely. When the giant fed smaller predators were forced away, but they did not go far. Once the tyrant moved on, they surged forward to claim scraps. Fucaraptor waited until they distracted one another, then darted in. Quick slashes of its claws and swift lunges drove rivals back long enough to tear away flesh. It was risky, but it kept the predator alive. Days stretched into weeks, and the land grew more strained. Forests near the river were torn up by trampling feet. Clearings that once rang with the calls of herds now lay silent. The balance was fracturing. Fucaraptor felt the change not only in the land, but in itself. It had grown leaner, its movements sharper, its senses more attuned. Every failed hunt and desperate victory honed it into something more than it had been before. The Tyrannosaur's dominance grew bolder. It began patrolling wide arcs as if marking its realm. Fucaraptor crossed one such boundary unknowingly one dusky evening, while stalking a group of startled iguanodons. The herd suddenly scattered without warning, their alarm not caused by Fucaraptor, but by the roar that followed. The tyrant appeared towering in the half-light, its massive form blotting out the horizon. Fucaraptor darted aside, barely avoiding the sweep of its head. The ground quaked as the Tyrannosaur charged not after the herd, but directly at the smaller predator. Teeth gnashed the air where Fucaraptor had stood moments before. It fled into the trees, weaving with agility, the giant crashing behind in hot pursuit. Branches splintered, earth split under the weight of the larger beast. Yet speed favored the smaller hunter. Fucaraptor darted between tight trunks and leapt over fallen logs, while the Tyrannosaur thundered to a halt, hindered by the forest's narrow spaces. For the first time, Fucaraptor felt the taste of possibility. It had escaped not by chance, but by exploiting what it had observed. The tyrant was powerful, but the land itself offered defenses for those swift and cunning enough to use them. This realization grew into strategy. Fucaraptor began testing the Tyrannosaur. It would approach the edges of its patrol, leaving signs of intrusion, claw marks on trees, a carcass dragged away, footprints near watering holes. Each time the tyrant responded in fury, roaring into the forest, chasing phantoms of its rival. Fucaraptor learned more with each encounter, how the giant moved, how quickly it tired, how rage dulled its judgment. But games could not last forever. The hunger remained relentless. One night, under a sky lit by a thin crescent moon, Fucaraptor trailed a herd of juvenile sauropods. They were immense compared to it, yet vulnerable when separated from their elders. Fucaraptor shadowed them, waiting for one to lag. Suddenly the herd erupted into chaos. The Tyrannosaur emerged again, smashing into the group. One young sauropod felt its cries echoing through the forest. Fucaraptor watched from the shadows, its stomach twisting with need. The tyrant feasted, tearing into the fallen prey with savage might. Blood slicked its jaws as it ripped apart chunks of flesh. Fucaraptor's muscles trembled. It could not challenge directly, but hunger clawed too fiercely to remain still. It edged closer, its eyes locked on the carcass. Then chance struck. A second predator arrived, drawn by the smell of blood. A massive Allosaurus crept into the clearing. Larger than Fucaraptor, though smaller than the Tyrannosaur, it lunged boldly. The tyrant roared in fury, slamming into the intruder. The clash shook the ground as teeth met flesh and tails whipped through the air. Fucaraptor seized the opening. It darted forward lightning fast, slicing through the carcass with claws and jaws. Strips of flesh tore free as the smaller predator ripped its prize. The giants clashed, distracted by their battle. Fucaraptor vanished into the trees, carrying its meal as roars thundered behind. That night was a turning point. Fucaraptor had not only survived, it had stolen from giants. The lesson was carved into its mind. Power could be challenged not with equal force, but with precision and cunning. As days passed, the valley bore deeper scars. The Tyrannosaur's reign brought endless bloodshed, yet in the shadows, Fucaraptor grew more daring. It was no longer the quiet hunter content with small kills. Each encounter sharpened its resolve. Each theft brought new confidence. The rising conflict was inevitable. Both predators now knew of the other not as passing nuisances, but as rivals bound by the same land, the same prey, the same hunger. The valley was not large enough for both. The forest whispered of the coming storm. Birds fled more often, herds moved with frantic urgency. Smaller predators vanished deeper into the shadows, sensing the tension that thickened with each passing day. Fucaraptor felt it too, a pressure in the air, a call to something greater than survival. It was no longer enough to adapt. The time was nearing when cunning alone would not suffice. The tyrant ruled with raw strength, but Fucaraptor's mind carried strategies honed by hardship. The clash between them was not just chance anymore. It was fate carved into soil and echoed in every trembling roar. The valley awaited the battle that would decide which predator would claim dominance and which would fade into silence. The storm broke at dawn. Rain had fallen through the night, leaving the valley heavy with mist. Trees dripped steadily, the air thick with damp and the earthy smell of soaked soil. Fucaraptor prowled along the ridges above the river, its movements tense, its senses stretched to every sound. The valley had grown too small, too fragile. It knew the truth in its bones. The time for hiding was gone. From below came the sound of crashing trees. A roar rolled across the mist, shattering the silence like thunder. The Tyrannosaur had come again. Herds scattered, their cries echoing as they stampeded for higher ground. Fucaraptor froze, watching from its perch. This was no random raid. The giant was sweeping its territory with intent, as if searching for something. It was searching for him. The smaller predator's heart pounded, but fear no longer ruled it. The weeks of hunger and stolen victories had forged something sharper than instinct. Cunning now surged with resolve. Fucaraptor turned from a ridge and slipped into the trees, heading toward the source of the roars. The clearing by the river was where they met. Mist swirled over churned earth and broken branches. The Tyrannosaur stood in the center, colossal and terrible, its eyes burning with a predator's fury. It had sensed Fucaraptor's presence many times before it felt the theft of its kills, smelled the tracks left to mock its patrols. Now its patience was gone. Fucaraptor emerged from the shadows. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the drip of water from the trees. The size difference was staggering. The Tyrannosaur towered like a moving mountain, each breath a rumble that shook the ground. Yet Fucaraptor did not retreat. Its body coiled, low claws flexing eyes, never leaving its rival. The giant struck first. It lunged forward, jaws gaping wide enough to swallow half a tree. Fucaraptor darted aside, lightning fast, ground trembling beneath the tyrant's weight as teeth snapped shut where it had been. Splinters of bark flew as the predator twisted around a fallen trunk, using the forest itself as a shield. Again the Tyrannosaur lunged, this time swinging its massive head sideways. The blow ripped through saplings, snapping them like brittle twigs. Fucaraptor leapt back, just out of reach the wind of the strike, brushing its scales. Adrenaline burned through its veins. It could not meet strength with strength. It had to turn the tyrant's rage against it. Dashing into the undergrowth, Fucaraptor weaved between close standing trees. The tyrant followed, smashing through. In a storm of destruction, trunks toppled, roots tore free, earth shook. Yet every step slowed it. Fucaraptor danced through the chaos, agile and precise, always staying just beyond reach. Then came the chance. The forest opened to a narrow ravine where rainwater had carved deep channels in the soil. Fucaraptor darted across, leaping from rock to rock. The tyrant thundered after, but its bulk betrayed it. Soil crumbled under its massive weight, sending it stumbling. Its roar shook the ravine as it struggled to regain footing. Fucaraptor seized a moment. It leapt to the tyrant's flank, claws slashing deep across its hide. Blood sprayed hot against the rain. The tyrant bellowed in pain, twisting to strike, but Fucaraptor had already vanished into the trees again. The battle raged on. The Tyrannosaur charged repeatedly, but each attack left it more enraged, more reckless. Fucaraptor stayed in motion, striking only when openings appeared, claws tearing at legs and flanks, then vanishing before the giant could retaliate. The forest itself became an ally, sheltering the smaller predator while hindering the giant's movements. But exhaustion pressed in. Every leap, every strike drained energy. Fucaraptor's sides heaved, its legs trembled. One mistake, one misstep, and the tyrant would end it in a single crushing bite. The final gamble had to come. Near the river stood a cluster of half-uprooted trees, their roots exposed by floodwaters. The ground there was soft, unstable. Fucaraptor circled, leading the tyrannosaur closer with calculated feints. Each roar, each failed strike drew the giant forward until it stood in the treacherous ground. Fucaraptor struck with everything it had. It lunged at the tyrant's face, claws raking across its snout. The tyrant roared in blinding rage and lunged downward, jaws wide. Its massive weight slammed into the sodden earth. The ground gave way beneath it. With a thunderous crash, the tyrannosaur toppled into the mire. Mud and water exploded around it as it thrashed, struggling to rise. The soft ground sucked at its legs, dragging it deeper with every violent movement. Fucaraptor circled the edge, its body quivering with exhaustion and triumph. The tyrant roared in fury, jaws snapping inches from freedom, yet every movement only pulled it further down. Blood streaked its face from the wounds carved earlier. Its strength, unmatched in open ground, was now its downfall in the trap the smaller predator had lured it into. The valley echoed with the sound of its struggle. Birds, scatterflocks wheeled overhead, as if marking the end of an era. At last the tyrant's roars grew weaker, its thrashing slowed, its massive head sagging as the mire claimed it. With one final defiant bellow, the giant fell silent, swallowed by the earth. Fucaraptor stood panting rain, washing the blood from its claws. For a long moment, it did not move, only staring at the place where the rival had vanished. The forest itself seemed to sigh in relief as silence crept back through the valley. The battle was over. Fucaraptor had not won through strength, but through cunning, through patience, and precision honed by hardship. It raised its head and let out a sharp cry that rang across the trees. No other predator answered. None dared. The valley was free. The rain eased as dawn gave way to pale sunlight. Clouds drifted apart, revealing a sky streaked with faint gold. Fucaraptor lingered at the edge of the mire, its body still tense, every muscle quivering with exhaustion. The valley was silent in a way it had not been for many moons. The tyrant was gone. Yet victory did not bring ease. Fucaraptor's flanks, heaved from the effort claws, still dripped with blood. The echoes of the battle clung to the air, the roars, the crashes, the earth's shaking fury. Even as silence spread, the predator's instincts did not release their grip. It scanned the trees, alert for movement, expecting another threat to rise from mist. None came. Gradually the world began to stir. Herds that had scattered during the clash returned in cautious steps. Long-necked herbivores lifted their heads, sniffing the air as if sensing the absence of their greatest enemy. Small dinosaurs chirped from the underbrush, their voices tentative then bold. Life was returning to the valley, but under a new balance. Fucaraptor limped away from the battle site, following the river upstream. Its wounds burned, yet none were fatal. Each scar told how close death had come and how survival had demanded every ounce of wit. The smaller predator knew it had no chance to dominate the valley through brute strength, but by removing the tyrant, it had earned a place no rival could easily challenge. At a clearing, the predator paused, lowering its head to drink from the river. Its reflection rippled in the water, a lean scar hunter eyes sharp with resolve. The image was not a monster that ruled with power, but a one that endured through intelligence. Each scar was a mark of earned survival and of a predator that adapted where others fell. Days passed and the valley slowly healed. Fallen trees from the clash still scarred the forest floor, yet new shoots already pushed through. The mire where the tyrant sank grew quiet, covered by reeds and dragonflies. Herds grazed without the constant fear of sudden annihilation. The air seemed lighter, freer. Fucaraptor adapted as well. No longer did it steal constantly from others. Instead, it learned to strike in silence, choosing prey wisely, conserving its strength. It hunted smaller dinosaurs' quick darting attacks that ended swiftly. When it did approach the kills of larger predators, they retreated rather than fight. Its reputation spread through the valley like unseen fire. The others knew it was not just another hunter. It was the one who had outwitted the tyrant. Yet solitude remained its companion. Even in triumph, Fucaraptor walked alone. Nights by the river were filled with distant calls of herbivores moving in herds and smaller predators calling to one another. Fucaraptor's cry cut sharp through the darkness, yet no answer ever came. It was a lone ruler in a land reshaped by its courage. Despite the loneliness, there was peace. The valley's silence was no longer heavy with fear, but with balance. Predator and prey moved in their rhythms without the shadow of the tyrant disrupting every cycle. Fucaraptor patrolled its territory, often pausing to listen to the rustling leaves or the splash of fish in the river. Where once it felt hunted, it now walked with steady purpose. One evening the predator returned to the ridge overlooking the valley. Mist rose from the river, glowing in the fading light. From here it could see herds spread across the plains feeding without panic. The world seemed vast and alive, and for the first time Fucaraptor felt not like a fugitive but like a guardian shaped by struggle. The memory of the tyrant still lingered. Sometimes at night Fucaraptor dreamed of the giant's roar, of its crushing steps at the moment the earth swallowed it whole. But each morning the sun rose, and the valley continued its endless cycle of life. Survival had been the only law, yet through survival Fucaraptor had found something greater. It had found belonging not with a pack, not with a herd, but with the land itself. And as the stars kindled above the forest, Fucaraptor lay beneath their glow, silent and watchful. The echoes of the battle were fading now, leaving behind only the story of how cunning had triumphed over brute force. A story written not in words, but in scars and tracks across the soil and the hush that followed a predator's roar. The valley was free, and Fucaraptor would guard it for as long as its strength endured. Seasons shifted in the valley as the wounds of battle gave way to new life. Where the ground had once been churned into mire by the thrashing tyrant, now wildflowers spread in clusters of pale yellow and violet. Trees that had been toppled grew sprouts from their shattered trunks. The air carried the hum of insects, the cries of distant birds, and the steady rhythm of herds moving once more without constant dread. Fucaraptor remained at the heart of this reborn world. It no longer wandered aimlessly in search of scraps, nor did it stalk in perpetual fear of being crushed beneath the shadow of a giant. The valley had become its realm, shaped not through conquest, but through the endurance of struggle. With each hunt and each patrol, the predator's place became clearer. It was not merely another hunter. It was a survivor carved by the land itself. The scars it bore were reminders of the night when survival hung by a single thread. A torn shoulder from the tyrant's strike. A gash along its side from the desperate grapple in the mire. Yet these wounds had healed into hardened ridges of flesh. They were marks of victory, trophies, carried not with pride, but with purpose. Each scar was proof that the valley could never again be claimed so easily by brute force alone. Other predators learned respect. Smaller raptors kept their distance, wary of crossing the scarred hunter. Even the large carnivores skirted its hunting grounds. They did not challenge what the land itself seemed to recognize. Fucaraptor's presence was more than dominance, it was balance. By its survival, it had created space for the valley's rhythms to return. The herds, too, changed. The long-necked giants moved with greater ease, grazing near the rivers, and raising their young without sudden panic. Hadrosaurs filled the plains in greater numbers, while small ceratopsians grazed along the edges of the forest. Their calls filled the air in constant chorus, as though nature itself had breath relief. Yet for all this abundance, Fucaraptor remained solitary. It watched the herds from the cover of ferns, moved silently through the trees, and drank alone at the river's bend. There was no pack, no mate, no echo of its call in the night. At times the solitude pressed heavy, but there was strength in it as well. Alone it had faced the tyrant, and alone it carried the memories of that victory. Over time the valley came to hold more than survival. It became home. Paths worn into the soil by its claws marked its territory. Rocks near the ridge carried the scent of its presence, warning rivals to turn back. In the cool of dawn it often rested in a clearing where sunlight cut through the mist, warming its scarred body. This was no longer a world to escape from. It was a world to defend. Years passed. Storms swept through the valley, yet the herds endured. Drought came, yet the rivers still wound to the heart of the land. And always Fucaraptor endured. Each passing season carved deeper understanding into the predator's mind. It knew the patterns of migration, the signs of prey, the subtle tremor in the earth that warned of danger. where the tyrant had relied only on might, Fucaraptor thrived on knowledge. One evening, as the sun setting crimson, Hayes the predator stood again upon the ridge. Below stretched the valley alive and whole. Herds grazed while pterosaurs wheeled overhead, their wings gilded in fading light. The river caught the glow like a band of molten fire, winding toward the horizon. For a long moment, Fucaraptor remained still, watching not as a fugitive, not as a thief of scraps, but as a sentinel. The tyrant's memory was now a shadow fading into the soil. What endured was a lesson that cunning and resilience could outlast even the greatest force. Fucaraptor had not only survived, it had shaped the fate of the valley. Its tale would never be told in words, yet it was etched into every scar, into every herd that grazed in peace, into every dawn that broke without the echo of a tyrant's roar. And so the scarred hunter turned from the ridge, walking back into the forest that had tested and shaped it. The valley lay secure behind it, the rhythm of life flowing unbroken. Its journey was not finished, for survival never ended. But for the first time there was no fear in its steps, only purpose. The valley belonged to all who lived within it. Yet in its silence and its balance, it also belonged to Fucaraptor, the lone survivor, the quiet guardian, the predator, who had proven that strength was not the only path to survival.